In the year COVID-20, the Denver Broncos were forced to start a running back at quarterback and then play a practice squad wide receiver at QB for an entire regular season game after all 4 of their QBs on roster were deemed ineligible.
3 big players were sent home today over COVID-19 concerns.
The league informed the team that Locke, Rippon, and Bortles are ineligible and must enter the league-mandated 5-day quarantine period.
The NFL used the Broncos to make an example of, and in hindsight, this very well may be the actual worst of the worst game ever series. How did the Broncos get to the point where an undrafted practice squad wide receiver was playing QB in a regular season game? What led up to that point? And what did that infamous game teach us about how hard it really is to play quarterback in the National Football League? I will answer that today as we revisit the NFL game without QBs. A true worst ever. You know the drill. Honestly, 2020 was a year where I think we all needed help, especially when it came to taking care of our mental health. If I can quote one of my all-time favorite players, Marshawn Lynch, take care of y'all bodies, take care of y'all chicken, and take care of y'all mentals, because we ain't lasting that long. I do 2 things for my mental health. I exercise religiously, and I talk about things that are bothering me with my wife. Now, that sounds simple, but I had to learn to not keep my emotions and true feelings bottled up through therapy. And that's why I'm thrilled BetterHelp is sponsoring today's show. I know lots of you out there have stuff you're dealing with, and sometimes it gets to be so much that you don't know how to handle or process it. BetterHelp can connect you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice and tools so you can take care of your mentals. Use my link below, betterhelp.com/thatsgoodsports. Answer a few questions and BetterHelp will connect you with a professional who has years of experience. You can do it all from your phone or computer with video chat or even messaging, whatever you feel comfortable with. You'll be matched with a therapist usually within 48 hours. And I'm serious, if you need somebody to talk to, do it now and use my link or choose That's Good Sports during sign up for a discount in your first month. Life is crazy. Sometimes we forget to put ourselves first. It's okay to do that, and this is how you can start. Let's start with the obvious. 2020 was a really stupid, messed up year.
This is weird.
The most strange year of football.
Now, the NFL got lucky that by the time their season started in September, we kind of had a grasp on what COVID was and how to basically work around it as best we could. The MLB and the NBA, of course, did not have that luxury, and it led to a true doomsday scenario. 2 Los Angeles teams winning championships. You're a bubble champion and a play-in champion, Lakers. That's it. Now, the NFL had time to prepare, and they created a setting where limited fans could attend games, where cardboard cutouts could be placed in the stands with fake crowd noise pumped in to create an uncanny version of a real football atmosphere. It was really worse than a bad movie script about sports if you were watching. Except when the South Park creators filled the Broncos stands with South Park characters. That was cool. Now, even with all of the restrictions, players left and right were still testing positive for COVID. Games were being moved and improvised, like when the Ravens played RG3 on a Wednesday afternoon in Pittsburgh. But the Broncos ended up finding themselves in an impossible situation ahead of a Week 12 matchup at home against the Saints, an 8-2 team destined for the playoffs and a potential run to the Super Bowl in Drew Brees' final season. After a win over Miami pushed Denver to 4-6, the Broncos were still holding on to a slim shot at the playoffs. QB Drew Lock had started 8 games at that point, throwing 7 touchdowns to 11 picks, with future convict Pat Shurmur calling in the dumbest plays you've ever seen. Lock was regressing, and it honestly felt like the Broncos had been playing without a quarterback all season. Now, before the game against the Saints, all of the Broncos quarterbacks on the active roster, there were 4, Drew Lock, Brett Rippon, Blake Bortles, and Jeff Driscoll, were deemed ineligible to play on Sunday. Why? Why were they deemed ineligible? Well, king of booty himself, third-string quarterback Jeff Driscoll tested positive for COVID.
Drew Lock, Brett Rippon, and Blake Bortles were all sent home today after contact tracing questions with backup quarterback Jeff Driscoll.
Now, at the time, the NFL was tracking player movement like everyone was a flight risk criminal. Drew Lock and Brett Rippon were placed on the COVID reserve list because of their close contact with Driscoll, and then practice squad QB Blake Bortles was also added to the list because the NFL learned all 4 guys were in the same room and they removed their masks with a COVID positive Jeff Driscoll mouth kissing them play-by-play breakdowns. So even though Driscoll was the only positive, the others were deemed high risk of eventually testing positive and were given a 3 or 4 day window where they would not be allowed to play, even if they kept testing negative. So just 2, maybe 1 day before the game, the Broncos were left without a quarterback. Now, reports at the time indicated that the 4 QBs were not cooperative during contact tracing investigations, had close contact with each other without masks, and failed to carry their tracking devices as required. Were the rules draconian? Well, that's for you to decide. But knowing the rules, it's hard to argue that it wasn't an extremely stupid and selfish move by those QBs. Because at the end of the day, it really fucked over the other guys in that locker room and the coaches who put all that work into fielding a team that was ready to play. It was also stupid of head coach Vic Fangio leading a coaching staff and not a single one of those guys thinking to keep one quarterback away from the other QBs in case some shit like this happened. Something other teams started doing after this event. Now, we later learned from Sam Farmer of the Los Angeles Times that unlike the Ravens-Steelers game that was postponed, the Broncos situation was different. The quarterbacks had deliberately tried to circumvent the league's COVID protocols. The key takeaway from Farmer's report is that John Elway, Denver's president of football operations at the time, made multiple frustrated attempts to convince Commissioner Roger Goodell to postpone the Sunday football game to Tuesday when the quarterbacks would be eligible to play. However, the league denied these requests because surveillance footage showed the quarterbacks had tried to deceive the system. They had removed their contact tracing devices and placed them in different corners of the meeting room while sitting together to watch film, which led to their automatic disqualification due to close contact. Not to mention Driscoll's mouth kissing. Let's all remember it that way. Jeff Driscoll was kissing the other quarterbacks, and that's why they weren't allowed to play. Now, whether or not you agree with an eye in the sky watching 4 grown men's every move, the NFL was not going to bend their rules to help the Broncos play a competitive game against the Saints, especially when we all knew the Broncos weren't going anywhere. Now, this was probably the NFL's way of apologizing for the no-call pass interference that cost the Saints everything in the playoffs. The Broncos were going to have to improvise, and their first choice for quarterback was an even more outlandish one than what actually happened on the field. Adam Schefter reported that the Broncos wanted to add their offensive quality control coach Rob Calabrese to the active roster and play QB against the Saints. Schefter said that Denver felt that Rob had the strongest command of its offense and he could run the system better than anybody. The league denied those requests that were made throughout the day on Saturday, saying that the Broncos could not activate a coach to their roster. The league doesn't want coaching staffs being storage areas for potential players. To which I say, why? Imagine the ratings if Dan Campbell had to suit up, even for one series to help his Lions.
That's all I think about, man.
Or Mike McDaniel using that elite speed to return a kick for the Dolphins. Or Bill Belichick given the dignity and chance to die on the field like a man by playing running back for an entire game. Now Calabrese was 30 years old at the time, but hadn't actually played live football since 2012, when he was a quarterback/receiver for the University of Central Florida. He had been coaching since 2013 and was serving in his first NFL coaching position with Denver as of 2019, just a year prior. Even at UCF, Rob had only thrown 12 touchdowns over 4 college seasons, so he wasn't exactly a stud in Conference USA. Plan B? Denver had a player on the practice squad by the name of Kendall Hinton, who they brought in after the draft as a wide receiver out of Wake Forest. Now, Hinton had started out as a quarterback at Wake Forest, but hadn't gotten behind center since 2018 and transitioned to the slot in 2019 as a receiver, racking up 1,000 yards in his first year at the position. He was the only player on Denver's roster that had any QB experience at the college level, so he was their last resort after their life was indeed cut into pieces.
Cut my life into pieces. This is my last resort.
Suffocation, no breathing. This is NFL without QBing. By week 12 of that season, Kendall Hinton had yet to be activated on game day. The Broncos decided that not only was he going to get onto the roster, he was going to play quarterback for this game. Now, Hinton became the first emergency quarterback to start in the NFL in 55 years since Baltimore Colts running back Tom Matt, a man nicknamed Garbage Can, did it in 1965. Now, the Colts mostly called design QB runs, and Matt threw the ball just twice in Baltimore's win over the Rams that vaulted them into the playoffs. That game forced Colts coach Don Shula to design the first ever play calling wristband. Something you see all the time in the modern NFL because most quarterbacks are too busy getting laid in high school to learn to memorize things. And Matt actually remained at QB for 2 more games, completing 5 of 12 passes in their playoff loss to the Packers. Back then, there was actually a 3rd place game for the 2 playoff losers, and Shula let Matt sling it against the Cowboys, throwing for 162 yards and 2 touchdowns in a 35-3 blowout win. Back at that time, players actually referred to that 3rd place consolation game as the Toilet Bowl. So yes, Garbage Can was MVP of the Toilet Bowl. Now, Kendall Hinton learned he'd be playing quarterback on Saturday. So after preparing a mere hours before Sunday, it was actually Mr. Colorado himself, Philip Lindsay, who made the official start at quarterback, running the ball out of the Wildcat before Hinton took the field. Now, Kendall Hinton's first pass, it was a throwaway on 3rd and 3. Pass number 2, a long ball for Jerry Jeudy that was nearly intercepted by Marshawn Lattimore. Pass 3, also a near pick. So at that point, he was on par with every Broncos quarterback who had played in the last 4 years. Should I mention that the Saints were also without their starting quarterback, Drew Brees, who had gone down with a rib injury 2 weeks earlier? They were using Taysom Hill. You might know him as the Mormon gadget quarterback, a jackknife of all trades, and he rushed for a pair of touchdowns in the first half. Now, by this point, Denver's defense was doing the best they could to keep the Broncos in the game, but everyone watching knew that the only real drama was whether or not Kendall Hinton could lead the offense to any sort of points or whether or not he would complete a pass. What became kind of perplexing throughout the game was that Hinton was dropping back and playing a very traditional style of QB. There weren't a lot of rollouts or quick throws or screens. You know, easy completions to give your quarterback a little confidence, get the offense in rhythm. Offensive coordinator Pat Shurmur did call 29 rushing plays as opposed to 12 dropbacks, but it never felt like he was doing Hinton any favors.
To me, this is a bit of a dinosaur call. You can't go out there and play spread football. You can't go out there and do dropback stuff and make him read or do nakeds like you normally do nakeds. So there were game strategic decisions I didn't understand. There were play calling, play design things I didn't understand that I was really frustrated with and just empathizing for what it must be like. I honestly could not imagine. You know, for me, it's probably the design more than anything else. I get what they're trying to do, get him a quick, easy completion. How about a perimeter screen?
He was airing it out, Kendall was, throwing a lot of passes deep down the field, and honestly, I really respect that. It's his only chance to play QB in the NFL, and he was playing with house money, and he let it rip. But if Pat Shurmur, say, wasn't thinking about all the fun things he could do with his future cellmates,
Do nakeds.
maybe he would have had the guy who was athletic enough to play wide receiver run the ball more than 2 times in the game, especially as the Saints were showing you exactly what to do with Taysom Hill on the other side. If you're new to this channel, let me fill you in real quick. Pat Shurmur was one of the worst offensive coordinators I've ever watched call plays in NFL history, not just Broncos history. And I spent all of 2020 begging authorities in the state of Colorado to arrest him and put him in jail where he belongs.
We did a drill today where we were actually trying to throw incompletions.
Now, Kendall Hinton went on to throw 2 interceptions, understandably, but he did finally get on the board with the completion. We knew a win was out of the question, but rooting for that one completion became the greatest joy Broncos fans had for all of that 2020 season. That is not a joke. Quite literally, this was our best moment as fans that year. Oh look, Shurmur finally dialed up a screen pass. It went to tight end Noah Fant, who rumbled for 13 yards and a first down. After 7 straight incompletions, Hinton found his target. We all knew the impossible task Hinton had been tasked to do, okay? An outsider can try and clown him for completing just 1 pass in this game, but he was a goddamn hero that day in Broncos country. Denver eventually avoided the shutout as well. Isang Slapadabasi picked off Taysom Hill, and Brandon McManus drilled the 58-yarder to make it 17-3. The Saints went on to score a couple more touchdowns courtesy of future Bronco Latavius Murray, with extra points from future Bronco Will Lutz, and New Orleans got the easy win, as they should have. After the game, future Broncos head coach Sean Payton was asked about Kendall Hinton and said the Saints were actually able to get college film on Kendall Hinton before the game. He also said they spent time preparing for the Wildcat offense and played mostly zone defense, which obviously worked out pretty well. Given Payton's history with Taysom Hill, I would have loved to see how he would have worked with Hinton in that scenario. But at the same time, I pray to God we never have to see this scenario again. As for Hinton, he got in front of the media after the game and proved he was a class act. Kendall Hinton really was the hero of this game, maybe of that season for the Broncos. He was put in a ridiculously impossible situation, did everything he could, and was a consummate teammate and pro after 4 actual quarterbacks let the team down. After the game, just like with Tom Matt, the NFL sent Kendall Hinton's wristband to Canton, Ohio. So yes, Kendall Hinton is a Hall of Fame QB. He also ended up being a pretty serviceable wide receiver in Denver for a few years. Hinton caught a touchdown pass a year later in Pittsburgh, and in 2022, he was the team's 4th leading wide receiver with 311 yards. The Broncos and their new coach, Sean Payton, eventually cut Hinton in 2023, but I believe he still ranks as one of the most beloved players in team history for his courage and willingness to help his team. I think one of the main things we learned was this: quarterback is unequivocally the hardest position in sports. It is so singular and so unique in terms of responsibility and skill set that even a guy just 2 years removed from playing the position in college didn't have a shot at succeeding in the NFL. So if you're ever wondering if you or a regular person could complete a pass in an NFL game, the answer is no. It is fuck no, you idiot, with an exclamation point, and if you think so, you're an idiot. Hinton was the answer to a lot of barroom hypotheticals that day. After that loss to the Saints, the Broncos closed the 2020 season with a 1-4 stretch. 4 different players, including Hinton, ended up taking snaps for Denver from the QB spot, and none of them were all that good. Ultimately, the Kendall Hinton game is like a metaphor for every other game for the Broncos in the post-Manning era. It's always felt like they've been playing without a quarterback, and this time it was literally true. Thanks for watching That's Good Sports, revisiting the quarterbackless game with Kendall Hinton. If you like this episode and want me to revisit another one, please let me know in the comments what I should do next.